If I was to ask you what it means to be mature, where would your head go? Do you imagine someone with a high-tier credit card, or bills to pay, or maybe an established career? Maybe you imagine a monk or someone with great emotional control, or some sort of virtuous saint with lots of patience. The last thing you'd probably imagine is a child, which makes sense. After all, children are impulsive, unaware, and almost blissfully ignorant of the so-called realities of life, right? While it may be true that kids are not mature, I think the concept of maturity as a whole has been boiled down to a to-do list of things like education, amount of money, and these material or sort of objective markers, and we've forgotten what actually ties all these things together, or what it really means to be mature. These markers, of course, can be clues or a start when looking at others, but I am convinced that maturity is not merely how many of your ambitions or goals you've accomplished, and I don't think maturity should be conceptualized or categorized in this way. I think maturity has to do more with the qualities which help people become whole, and that there are plenty of people who have a great resume these days, but I would not consider mature, as they ignore the intermediary work or the thread that ties everything together. And that thread that ties somebody's life together is the person they are, the qualities they have fostered or preserved. And I think in our culture, which values productivity and ambition more than anything else, there's a kind of halo effect people experience when they see somebody with a good resume, that they are automatically regarded more highly, but automatically seen as mature, which I don't think is true a lot of the time. In this video, I want to talk about what it means to be mature, and some common misconceptions of what it means to grow in life. First, I want to talk about what it's not. You know, all the older people I've talked to in my life, like immediate relatives and whatnot, I've always heard the phrase or something along the lines of, that's life, or that's just the reality of the situation, kid. And this phrase never kind of triggered me more. I never really believed it, and I never really got to understanding why until recently. And that is because a lot of maturity or what we call maturity these days, is really just a pessimistic attitude, or a kind of giving up on life, or a tiredness that we mask and brand as maturity. And it's this rebranding which people pay a very hidden cost that is detrimental to their overall health. You know, there's a kind of common journey or trope that everyone takes, and they have this childlike wonder. You're born into the world with this curiosity and creativity and wonder, and as life gets on and things happen and you get jaded, the temptation to give in to the kind of tiredness, or to just give up on a lot of the innocence and curiosity about the world, is really high, right? It's like the more you get hurt, the less you're likely to explore options and try again. And I see now that what people call mature is just this loss of innocence or curiosity and wonder, but I don't think that's maturity in any way. These parts of yourself, innocence, curiosity, and wonder, that may have been more prevalent in your childhood, are just as important these days as they are back then. There's no excuse, and our maturity should not be used, at least as an excuse, to cover up all the damage that has been done, essentially representing all your wounds as these wise lessons. Disillusionment is not wisdom, and pessimism is not maturity. And so I don't think maturity would be losing any of these things in any ways, and that engaging with life in fun ways, or in curious and wondrous ways, is not immature in any way. And so, if that's what maturity isn't, then what is it? And I think maturity is better looked at as one's sort of physical, mental, or moral peak. And the best way to explain this, I think, is with an analogy. That is, if you'd imagine a musician, a beginner musician, trying to learn the piano. As he goes along and starts the piano in his career, he may be able to play less structured, he knows less theory, he knows less of the sort of rigid confinements or rules that make what we know as a great musician. But he can still play sort of emotionally and tap into all the novelty and the wonder, and is driven by this sense of curiosity. And as he goes on in his career, a few years in, he starts learning the more rigid and rule-based, or the technical stuff, the chords, the scales, the notes, the songs, the symphonies. Maybe he learns how to read sheet music and classically gets involved in his studies in a very rule-based or to-do list kind of way, like obligatory, if that makes sense. This is kind of opposite to what would, or it doesn't allow for the same kind of play that would come about when he was a beginner. Like the emotion kind of is stripped out when you take all these rules and try to learn your instrument in a specific way. Now, I would argue that this kind of state, imagine the musician is the sort of jaded state when you learn more about music and you learn all the obstacles ahead of you and all the strict rules. You might be demotivated and unwilling to learn further, but I think a fully mature person goes past this point and reincorporates the kind of wonder or curiosity and emotional play side into his newfound skill and technical skill, and combines them into a beautiful piece, or a beautiful symphony in this case. And in many ways then, maturity is more a balance between this kind of freedom and restriction. It's not deleting anything completely, but a healthy integration of the two. It's refinement. And so overall, in the same way, when going about your life, I think it's important to understand what makes you great and what makes you jaded, and take the best of both worlds and combine them into a more whole person. And now, of course, when I say whole person, that is going to be a little more dependent on who you are and what you're trying to accomplish. But in general, I don't think deleting parts of yourself entirely is what maturity is, but it's what we might call it these days. By all means, be strong, be wise, be responsible and sensible, but don't brand your cynicism and your wounds as maturity. For I think in our culture of ambition, this might be one of the greatest temptations that we face. And as always, if you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching. I'd love to hear your suggestions and comments below. Please consider subscribing if you like the content, and I wish you all the best.